There are 4 Gospels in the New Testament. They are all written by different authors with different backgrounds and agendas. Matthew, he was one of the 12 disciples. He followed Jesus, and he was also one of the witnesses to Jesus' ascension. He was a former tax collector, which was one of the most criticized profession. He was despised by many. But Matthew, he was a Jew, but how traditional we don't know. But the way Matthew's Gospel is written suggests that he knew a lot about Jewish laws and customs. But it's also linked to his profession. So here in the Gospel of Mark, for example, it talks much more about money than the other 3 Gospels does. But what is also so interesting is that the word righteousness, it appears only once in the other 4 Gospels. However, it appears 7 times in the Gospel of Matthew, including 5 times in the Sermon on the Mount. The word righteousness is not a word we use daily basis these days, not me anyway. But I think we all know that it has something to do by doing the right thing. Being righteous to us means in the sense of being morally true or justifiable. But in a deeper spiritual sense, it means being righteous before God. That in our character, in our attitude, in our words and our actions. Jesus, he said in Matthew 5 and 10, that blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. It is in the 8th and finally Beatitude. And when we take the 4th and the 8th Beatitudes together, we get something like this. We are to hunger and thirst for a kind of life that will cause some people to persecute us for our faith. So righteousness is a lifestyle that distinguishes us as true Christians and invites opposition from the world. Matthew 5 and 20 tells us that, for I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. The Pharisees, they had created a religious system that was built around visiting the temple, and it involved very special rules and regulation. It was, in a way, artificial, and to use another word, a very strong one, fake. But in a way, it can mean the same for us today. There are congregations that have lukewarm services, where you don't want or dare to talk openly about what the Bible really says. Everything seems to be okay, but at the same time, it is also built in with rules and regulations that few understand. But true righteousness, that begins in the heart and changes that person from the inside and out. The path of righteousness leads to life, not death. Proverbs 12. Because God, you see, is the ultimate source of life. This means that righteousness belongs to God alone, and therefore we truly find his righteousness when we follow God. Pursuing God's righteousness means putting God at the center of our lives. Jesus, he uses metaphors of eating and drinking as the motivating force to live a righteous life. Here, in the rather rich part of the world, we probably don't need to wait too long for food and drinks. So our problem is not to find something to eat. It is losing weight after eating too much. We are not very hungry and thirsty for so long, and we don't use those words when we are craving for something specific. So to understand the words, we must go back to the source, the bread of life. Jesus, he said, I am the bread of life. No one who comes to me will never be hungry, and no one who believes in me will ever be thirsty again. I am the living bread that come down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. The bread that I give for the life of the world is my flesh. Jesus also talked about being the living water when he had a conversation with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, who is also a very interesting woman in the New Testament. The more satisfied we are with God, the more dissatisfied we are with substitutes. What Jesus has done is create in us a hunger for God. It is actually something that I see and feel in many people in many different churches around our city. And when I see that, when I hear that, I know that there is hope.